Hi everyone, I'm Natalia and welcome to my channel and welcome to Intro to Shadow Work and Tarot for Beginners. This is a mini series that I'm making to aid all of those of you who would like to engage in this work with tarot and oracle cards, to also for those who are already doing this work to get maybe additional insight that might lend an additional layer of depth or information to your readings and to the work that you're already doing. As already mentioned before, I do have an intensive class on shadow work using tarot and oracle cards that covers anything and everything you need to know, that has 4 modules. It's an online self-paced course. Link is below in case if you want to check it out. But this is going to give a little bit of information for those people who may not really want to take the whole course, or people who may not be in position to buy an entire course. So I thought it would be a great idea to do a little mini series, not only to give you all information, but also share the subject that I'm so passionate about. So in lesson 1, we talked about shadow, what Jung meant by shadow, and the fact that Jung never really coined the term shadow work. It's really not a Jungian term at all. But who knows who coined it? But here we are using it left and right, and why not? We all are striving, as far as I know, at least I am, for self-growth and maturity and understanding myself. At least that's definitely one of the main reasons why I engage with so many wonderful tarot and oracle cards, because they're such fantastic tool and a window in my inner self, and they have helped me tremendously in discovering who I am and also in uncovering my shadow self and help me integrate it. So in this lesson 2, I would like to talk to you why do shadow work? Why shadow work is so important? Can we live without working on our shadow self at all? Is that even sustainable or reasonable? And discuss briefly projections, because they kind of lend such an important, what's the word I'm looking for? Jumping sprint point into the importance of why we want to do shadow work. So not everybody is going to believe Jungian theory. Not everybody is going to think that what Jung invented is a true and tested method. Some people may think it's all bullshit. Some people may think it's all just philosophizing the concept of the psyche, and that's fine too. However, we cannot disregard a particular element. At least I can, because I witnessed it myself again and again and again, and I know that everybody does this because I work with clients, I work with human beings, and I see this constantly. And that is when we become very reactive and we act very reactively. And a lot of times we don't even know why we're acting so reactively, but we're having a reaction. And suddenly, as if somebody takes over our whole personality, and we don't even recognize ourselves anymore. I know for a fact, a lot of you, all of you, I would even say, had those moments in your life when suddenly things have happened to you. I know that I get very reactive when I watch certain political candidates. I know so do you too. So what is that reactiveness there? What is it telling you about yourself? Where is it coming from? And if you don't believe in all of these concepts or how they're laid out, that's fair. But we also can't negate the fact that something happens to us. We lose our sense of orbit of self-control, mindfulness, being able to be responsive versus reactive when certain things in life happens. And you called what happens in those instances is reenactment of our shadow self. We become something else because we're not aware of these parts of ourselves. We're not conscious of them. They take an element and life of its own. And that's why, my friends, it is so important to do shadow work, because we don't want to be walking around reactive, hyper-reactive human beings, constantly being triggered by everything and acting unlike ourselves. First of all, it is a very painful way to live a world, trust me. Second of all, it is very I would say, sleepwalking zombie way of living the world, and it's not worth it. Not when we can do this work, not when we can practice it, not when even without tarot and oracle cards, we can work on ourselves and stop the reactiveness at least before it can potentially hurt us and really, really hurt another human beings. Because I see the reactiveness all of the time because I work with transgender adults. So I see people being so reactive on my other YouTube channel. The comments that I get are full of reactiveness, and it's unnecessary verbal forms of diarrhea. I call them diarrhea. That's the only way that I can, because there's nothing good about it. It's verbal forms of outbursts and diarrhea of what I call individual parts of ourselves that are still childlike, that still have not learned how to control our feces, still have not learned potty training. And so we've all been there. We all do this. To this day, some of us can be that reactive, can have verbal diarrhea either on social media or either among people in our lives. And it's unpleasant. When we have uncontrollable diarrhea, it's disgusting. We look disgusting. We look small. Nobody looks good. Nobody looks smart. Nobody looks mindful. Nobody looks powerful. Nobody looks like they have their shit together, literally, when they have verbal diarrhea. So for that reason, shadow work becomes really, really important. And this is how we get to projections, because this is one of the best ways to identify elements in our life where shadow work is needed. And I'm going to be quoting a few things here. So first, before we talk to projections, let me quote, and I'll link those books below again. I linked them in the first lesson. This is from Robert Johnson. Let me just read you this because this is a wonderful way to sum things up. The persona, another Jungian concept, is what we would like to be and how we wish to be seen by the world. So I often call persona is the mask. So it's how we want to show up to the world. Right now, what you see on this channel is a personified self, meaning, yes, sure, this is who I am, but this is not 1000% authentic me because I have to maintain some element of boundary within myself and the viewer and the world, right? I have to keep some things private and personal. So what you see is a persona of Natalia, tarot shrink, psychologist who talks about tarot, which certainly is built and structured based on authentic aspects of myself, but it's just a part of me. So that's a persona, how we want to be seen by the world. It is our psychological clothing. I love the term psychological clothing, and it mediates between our true selves and our environment, just as our physical clothing presents an image to those we meet. The ego is what we are and know about consciously. So the ego, I often call our mind. This is what you're consciously aware of. This is what you think you are. This is what you think you know about yourself. That's your ego. The shadow is a part of us we fail to see or know. Fantastic. Great, great, to the point. And I think it just so beautifully illuminates how it's just something we fail to see or know. Not sharp, Robert Johnson can't even name it what it is, because each of our own elements of shadow are going to be so subjective and personal and different. So, and just to give you just a little synopsis. Let me now, before we get onto the projections, let me read from David Sharp, Jung Lexicon, that also I mentioned in lesson 1. I'm going to link it again below, again on a shadow, where he discusses what happens when we don't uncover it, what happens when we don't work on our shadow. He says here, when it is willfully repressed, it willfully repressed, right? Let's take a moment here. What does it mean, willfully repressed? In my opinion, willfully repressed is when we are aware that we need to do this work and we refuse to do this work for whatever reasons, either ego resistance or because we find the work too challenges, or we don't want to confront ourselves, which, by the way, all fall into ego resistance category anyway. And that's what for me would be a willful way of repressing it. You're now actively not doing the work you need to do. When it is willfully repressed, it continues in the unconscious and merely expresses itself indirectly and all the more dangerously, so no advantage is gained. In other words, none of us benefit by keeping our shadow repressed, by not working on ourselves. Nobody benefits. We only, all of the wars from horrific world war under Hitler regime to current horrific Russians against Ukrainians war under Putin regime. Just to give you an idea, we are witnessing a dangerous reenactment, at least in our lifetime, just the way people witnessed during World War. We're witnessing a horrific reenactment of what happens when a shadow is not worked on. What happens when it becomes dangerous? And this is the extreme of not working on yourself. Yeah, it's horrifying. It is horrifying. On small cases, on a smaller levels, we're witnessing human acts of hatred and violence, a lot of violence, whether it is verbal or physical violence or psychological violence or any other violence. It is horrific. I used to work in practicum many years ago when I was getting my clinical hours after my master's degree, and I was working in a nonprofit group that focused on providing group therapy to secondary and primary offenders. And it was primarily men, although there's a lot of women who are offenders of domestic violence as well, a lot more than we realize. But the point being is that it's amazing to see how for both these individuals groups, how they really neglected to work on themselves, and it was coming out in this horrific reenactments within their partners and sadly with their kids in a form of domestic violence. So it really is important work to do. Let's see, what else did I want to read? He goes on to also say, this process of coming to terms with the other is the shadow aspect within ourselves. The other in us is well worthwhile, of course, because in this way we get to know aspects of our nature which we would not allow anybody else to show us and which we ourselves would never have admitted. So it's really important, because once you know what's there, you can accept it, integrate it, and by doing so, it doesn't have a hold on you. By doing so, you're not reacting to things, right? And when I say reacting, reactions are almost always happen in the form of projections. Of course, not all reactions are projections, but we're talking about a very strong, emotionally supercharged reactions that we are having. And to give you an idea of what projection is, because it is a Jungian term, projection is, and I'm quoting Sharp here, projection is an automatic process. So it happens automatically. It is not even a conscious process, whereby contents of one's own unconscious, one's own shadow aspects are perceived to be in the others. So you're seeing in the other person an element, everybody is a mirror image, right? Or a potential mirror image of you recognizing aspects of yourself. So when you see somebody, for example, okay, I don't want to name political names because we all have different political views. When I watch some political individuals, my skin boils. And the reason why my skin boils is because I am recognizing, without even being aware of it, my unconscious self, my shadow elements are recognizing itself in the person. Now, it's obviously not as literal as I think it is. It's not that I'm exactly like that person, but there's something about this person that my shadow recognizing that is pulling on it and saying, hey, this is familiar, and yanking at me and jerking at me and producing a reaction. And the reason why I have a negative, hateful, bitching, venting, complaining to my husband why I hate this political candidate and I can't stand it and turn the channel off is because my ego doesn't want to acknowledge, because the ego can sense to this part of who I am. And so by having this reaction, righteousness, this feeling of I'm better than this person, all the while being very, very reactive and having hateful speech towards the person in the privacy of my home, of course. And some people don't even do it in the privacy of their home. What I'm doing is I am being in complete possession and control of my shadow. And that's not pretty. But all of us have done it. And this is why shadow work is so, so important to do. Now I'm going to quote some quotes from Carl Jung on projection. As we know, it is not the conscious subject, but the unconscious who does the projecting. So meaning, just to give you an idea how much of ourselves that is daily maybe engaging and conversing and reacting is not even our conscious self. I do not want to be a puppeteer of my shadow selves. I don't want to be a puppeteer of my unconscious content. I want to be aware of it. I want to know what's there. Because if there is somebody that has not worked on certain elements, for example, of maybe like, let's say, envy toward beauty, right? I'd rather know that they're there and work on them. So when I feel envy toward a beautiful woman or a beautiful man or a beautiful person, that instead of getting triggered and being reactive, I can say, hey, Nat, remember, this is your shadow self. You're working on this. You have an envy toward beauty. This is the work you're doing. And it can help put a pause for me to be able to step into more mindful interaction with that person. So you understand now why it's so, so important to do shadow work. Again, quoting Jung here, projections change the world into the replica of one's own unconscious face. I'm going to read it again because this is the key. Our projections, what we project onto others, change the entire world into the replica of our own unknown face. If you want to know what your face is, start looking at what you're projecting onto the world, because it is, you are creating. God, it reminds me of, you know, when you go to arcade. In Russia, we had arcade where you walk in, and there was this one arcade with all of this mirrors, but they're all distorted. So each one will show you looking very different. It reminds me of being stuck in an arcade of your own projections. And the final quote that I want to read to you from Jung, the general psychological reason for projection is always an activated unconscious that seeks expression. Okay, let me read it again because it's so good too. The general psychological reason for projection, so generally speaking, why we always project, is an activated unconscious that seeks expression. So that unconscious wants to express itself. It wants to come out. It doesn't want to be sitting there in the dark. And that's why we need to do this work. And this is why this work is so important, because we want to be, it's not about being control freaks and being so in control of yourself, because that's impossible. Control is an illusion. But it is about having an element of understanding, better understanding of who you are. The more you understand who you are, the more you can be mindful towards yourself, toward others, gentler towards yourself, toward others, kinder towards yourself, toward others. You just become a better person to this, better person to everybody else. It's a really, really important thing to do. Really, you know, my being on platforms and being a content creator on this platform, and especially on my Dr. Z PhD platform, where I talk about transgender adults and I talk about gender dysphoria for transgender adults, has taught me so much about myself, because I am constantly being challenged, especially on that channel, constantly being challenged by people projecting their stuff onto me. And their projections elicit a reaction in me because my part of self, recognizing myself in those projections. So it has given me so much food for thought. Those projections that we experience, as I say, are breadcrumbs. They're breadcrumbs to follow because they're going to teach you so much about yourself. And it is so, so deeply invaluable. So comment below, let me know when you have felt, can you be brave enough to name an event when you were wrapped up in projections. And sometimes it can feel like somebody's literally taking a hold of you. They can be really, really powerful. So comment below, let me know. And we will continue on to, I think lesson 3 is some doing shadow work basics. Then lesson 4 going to be a really fun one. It's going to be about shadow work decks. And I have a lot to say on that. And I'll share with you some of the decks and oracle and tarot cards that I think are the best. And also cleverly how you can break it down into categories that can be really conducive for you. And then we'll wrap it up in lesson 5. So it's going to be 5 lessons. I have just decided because I think it's going to be just enough to give those of you who are not familiar with this enough to start doing this work. So who are familiar to dig even deeper. So I'll see you all next time. Bye, guys.